Welcome to Conspiracy Theories and Cover-Ups. I'm your host Ben Carter, and in today's episode, we step behind the curtain of one of the most secretive and powerful gatherings on Earth, the Bilderberg Group. Shrouded in mystery and off-limits to the press, this annual meeting of elites has sparked decades of suspicion. Are these private discussions merely networking events, or is something far more orchestrated unfolding behind closed doors? Today, we ask, who's really pulling the strings of power? It began in 1954, in the shadow of a continent still recovering from the devastation of the Second World War. The Cold War was escalating, the Iron Curtain had fallen across Europe, and a deep ideological divide separated the capitalist West from the communist East. Against this backdrop of global tension and nuclear dread, the inaugural meeting of what would later be known as the Bilderberg Group took place at the Hotel de Bilderberg in Oosterbeek, the Netherlands. The goal, at least officially, was to foster dialogue between Europe and North America to prevent another catastrophic conflict. But from its inception, the secrecy of the event, the prominence of its attendees, and the total absence of public oversight planted seeds of suspicion. The original meeting was co-founded by Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, a former Nazi Party member who later worked closely with the Allied forces. Alongside him were Polish political advisor Jozef Rettinger, former Belgian Prime Minister Paul van Zeeland, and the head of Unilever, Paul Rykens. On the American side, the key sponsor was Joseph Rettinger's friend, then CIA-affiliated David Rockefeller, whose deep ties to banking and global finance gave the group a direct link to Wall Street and Washington. The idea was simple in theory: bring together the most influential figures from Western Europe and North America, politicians, bankers, military leaders, CEOs and royalty, for a confidential exchange of ideas. By speaking candidly without press scrutiny or political backlash, they believed the West could stay united and avoid war. But this lack of transparency would become the group's most controversial feature. From the very beginning, no minutes were taken, no resolutions were adopted, no policy statements were issued. The meetings were strictly off the record. Those invited were forbidden from quoting or recording any of the discussions. This cloak of confidentiality, while intended to encourage open dialogue, simultaneously fueled paranoia. For decades, critics have argued that when some of the most powerful people in the world meet in secret, it's not conversation they're having, it's coordination. As the Cold War progressed, so did the influence of the Bilderberg Group. It evolved into an annual event, each year hosted in a different Western nation. Attendance was strictly by invitation only, with a preference for those already in high positions of influence or those being groomed for such roles. The guest list often read like a who's who of the global elite: presidents, prime ministers, central bankers, NATO officials, heads of multinational corporations, and leaders of major media organizations. Its transatlantic nature allowed it to function as a kind of shadowy bridge between the United States and Europe, forming what some call an informal, unelected axis of influence. And yet, for decades, the media said nothing. Despite the presence of top editors and journalists at the meetings, the existence of the group was rarely mentioned in major outlets. This blackout only deepened public distrust. By the 1970s, whispers began to grow louder. Researchers and independent journalists began piecing together evidence of the group's operations, combing through hotel bookings, corporate jets, and leaked attendee lists. They began to see a pattern. Many major global events, currency shifts, military alliances, trade policies, seemed to align suspiciously with topics discussed at Bilderberg meetings. Critics alleged that this was not a forum for discussion, but a steering committee for the global order. And yet, the group continued to deny any policy-making role. Defenders claimed the organization was merely a forum for open debate, emphasizing that consensus was never sought and that members came with differing views. But the question persisted: if there was truly nothing to hide, why all the secrecy? As the 20th century gave way to the 21st, a new wave of attention emerged. The rise of the internet made it harder for Bilderberg to remain in the shadows. Leaked guest lists began circulating online. Activists and protesters began following the meetings, setting up camp outside luxury hotels and snapping long-lens photos of arriving limousines and private jets. The once hidden group was now the centerpiece of a growing global suspicion, a symbol of how little the public really knew about the decisions shaping their lives. And through it all, one question never faded. If global power is truly democratic, why do the world's most powerful still insist on meeting in the dark? Over the decades, the Bilderberg Group's invitation list has read like a blueprint of global influence. Behind the guarded walls of five-star resorts and heavily secured compounds, names from the highest rungs of politics, finance, intelligence, and media have gathered, often without their public constituents ever knowing they were gone. These aren't fringe players. They're presidents, prime ministers, CEOs of trillion-dollar corporations, and editors-in-chief of the world's most trusted news outlets. Among the early American participants was David Rockefeller, a towering figure in international finance and a major force in shaping post-war economic policy. As chairman of Chase Manhattan Bank, his global reach extended deep into both governmental and corporate spheres. He was an outspoken advocate for global cooperation and often used his influence to champion internationalist policies. To many conspiracy theorists, he wasn't merely attending Bilderberg, he was shaping its agenda. Critics saw Rockefeller as an archetype of the elite, a man with no official government post, yet whose shadow fell over monetary policy, trade agreements, and foreign affairs. Another frequent attendee was Henry Kissinger. As National Security Advisor and later Secretary of State under Presidents Nixon and Ford, Kissinger wielded enormous influence in foreign policy decisions during the Cold War. His presence at Bilderberg meetings, both during and after his time in office, raised serious questions about the separation of public duty and private alliance. Was policy being crafted by elected officials accountable to the public, or by unelected technocrats operating behind closed doors? British royalty also appeared on the guest list. Prince Philip, Prince Charles, and later Prince William were reportedly briefed or invited to attend. Their participation added another layer of complexity. Members of a constitutional monarchy, who are supposed to remain politically neutral, rubbing shoulders with heads of state and financial oligarchs in secret. The monarchy's presence lent the group an air of tradition and prestige, but also underscored the inherited nature of elite power. On the European political side, figures like Angela Merkel, Emmanuel Macron, and even Margaret Thatcher attended meetings early in their careers. Curiously, many political attendees were relatively unknown at the time of their invitation, yet rose to positions of extraordinary power soon after. This pattern led many to speculate whether Bilderberg acted as a kind of vetting process for future global leaders. Were these meetings more than discussion forums? Were they auditions? Then there are the tech titans and media moguls. Eric Schmidt, former CEO of Google, was a repeat attendee, as was Peter Thiel, co-founder of PayPal and early investor in Facebook. Bill Gates' name has circulated in relation to the group, though his exact role remains disputed. With tech rapidly surpassing traditional government in terms of influence and reach, the presence of Silicon Valley's elite suggested a new dimension to the group's agenda, control not just of policy, but of information, data, and perception itself. Even more troubling to critics is the recurring attendance of major media figures. Editors from the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Economist, and the Financial Times have all been invited over the years. While their presence could be interpreted as a desire to understand global issues more deeply, it raised another question. Why would members of the free press attend secret meetings where reporting is expressly forbidden? Were they there as journalists or as collaborators? The line between public servant and private influencer begins to blur when these individuals gather off the record. Without minutes, transcripts, or public accountability, the exact nature of their discussions remains unknown. And while defenders argue that powerful people naturally congregate to share ideas, critics maintain that such concentrated influence, conducted in total secrecy, is incompatible with democracy. Ultimately, the identity of those who attend Bilderberg isn't just a list of names. It's a web of connections that spans continents, industries, and ideologies. And it raises a disturbing possibility. that the real decisions about our world's future might not be made in parliaments or congresses, but over champagne and quiet handshakes behind closed doors. Over the years, a constellation of claims and fragments of evidence have emerged that form the backbone of the Bilderberg conspiracy theory. While hard proof remains elusive due to the closed nature of the meetings, those who have studied the group point to recurring themes, leaked documents, and coincidental global shifts as indirect but persuasive indicators of something more coordinated beneath the surface. The primary claims can be boiled down to three central accusations: covert policy planning, undemocratic influence, and the grooming of future leaders. One of the most consistent allegations is that Bilderberg acts as an unofficial policy council, a place where global economic and political strategies are developed in private, then implemented publicly without the knowledge or consent of voters. Critics cite the uncanny synchronicity between topics allegedly discussed at Bilderberg meetings and major global policy moves that follow shortly thereafter. For example, the push toward a unified European currency, the euro, was reportedly a recurring topic of conversation in the 1990s Bilderberg meetings. Years later, the euro became a reality, reshaping the continent's economy and sovereignty in ways that many nations were unprepared for. Was this simply good forecasting by the elite, or the quiet orchestration of a grand economic plan? Supporters of this theory also point to the frequency with which invitees to Bilderberg ascend to powerful leadership roles not long after attending. Bill Clinton attended in 1991 while still governor of Arkansas. A year later, he was elected President of the United States. Tony Blair, too, was invited in 1993 as a relatively unknown member of Parliament. Within 4 years, he was Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. José Manuel Barroso attended Bilderberg just before becoming President of the European Commission. These patterns, critics argue, are too precise to be coincidental. They suggest Bilderberg is not merely a forum for discussion, but a proving ground, an elite endorsement pipeline for those who will soon steer the world's course. Beyond policy influence and leadership grooming, there's also the issue of financial synchronization. Some researchers argue that major economic shifts, including interest rate changes, currency valuations, and even oil prices, appear to be preceded by Bilderberg summits. The meetings typically occur in May or June, and according to some financial conspiracy theorists, the economic shocks that follow seem to mirror the private interests of those who were in attendance. One example often cited is the 2008 financial crisis. In the lead-up to the collapse, major bankers and financial ministers gathered at the 2008 Bilderberg meeting in Chantilly, Virginia. While there's no direct evidence of any coordinated plan, the timing has fueled claims that some of the elite may have used foreknowledge of the impending crisis to protect their own assets while the broader public bore the brunt of the collapse. Leaked documents and insider reports have added fuel to the fire. In 2013, a whistleblower connected to a hotel staff reportedly leaked internal Bilderberg talking points, which included concerns about uncontrolled populism, the integrity of the European Union, and the growing challenge of cybersecurity. While not definitive proof of collusion, such leaks are seen by critics as rare glimpses into the themes that dominate elite anxiety, and possible plans to counteract shifts in public sentiment that threaten the status quo. Then there's the issue of secrecy itself. The strict ban on recording devices, the absence of press coverage, and the denial of public transcripts all lend a sense of intentional concealment. If the meetings are truly benign, why the intense efforts to keep them hidden from public view? For many, this opacity is the clearest indicator that Bilderberg is not simply an elite social club, but a covert steering committee for global governance. Taken together, these patterns of synchronized leadership ascension, economic shifts, and consistent secrecy form the scaffolding of the Bilderberg conspiracy theory. The pieces may be indirect, speculative, and circumstantial, but to many, they paint a picture of a world being guided not by elected governments, but by a select circle of unelected, unaccountable elites. Critically analysing the evidence surrounding the Bilderberg Group requires navigating a maze of indirect clues, anecdotal reports, and circumstantial timelines. The nature of the group's operations, private, unrecorded and media-shielded, makes direct verification nearly impossible. Yet this very lack of transparency is often interpreted as a form of validation by those who suspect deeper motives. To discern the validity of these claims, it's necessary to examine the strongest threads of alleged evidence and contrast them with observable reality. One of the most commonly cited examples involves the trajectory of political careers. As previously noted, individuals like Bill Clinton and Tony Blair saw rapid ascents to power following their participation in Bilderberg meetings. However, when examining these cases more closely, it's possible to see that both men were already on significant political trajectories. Clinton was a rising Democratic figure and considered a potential presidential candidate before his invitation. Similarly, Blair had gained media attention in the UK for his charismatic leadership style well before his own attendance. While the timing is provocative, the correlation between Bilderberg attendance and political advancement may not necessarily imply causation. Another often repeated claim involves the adoption of the euro. Conspiracy theorists argue that its implementation was planned and engineered through Bilderberg meetings, particularly in the 1990s. While it's true that European economic integration was a frequent topic of discussion, many of the planning stages for the euro were public and involved extensive bureaucratic and legislative processes in the European Union. However, what gives weight to conspiracy claims is the idea that Bilderberg acted as an informal space where consensus could be reached more rapidly than in official EU negotiations, which were often mired in red tape and national interests. The suggestion is not that Bilderberg replaced formal channels, but that it pre-aligned key influencers to ensure those channels would produce the desired outcome. Leaked documents have occasionally emerged, though their authenticity is difficult to confirm. In some instances, meeting agendas or attendee lists have been published by investigative journalists or whistleblowers. These documents often include broad topics such as global economic outlook, cybersecurity, population movement, or energy transitions. While these subjects are not inherently nefarious, critics argue that their vagueness allows for manipulation behind the scenes. Furthermore, when these same themes dominate policy discussions in the months and years that follow, it feeds the narrative that Bilderberg functions as a forecasting and policy prepping mechanism for the global elite. Another point of analysis concerns the composition of the guest list. Bilderberg meetings frequently include representatives from major central banks, the European Central Bank, the Federal Reserve, and the Bank of England among them. The presence of these financial authorities, alongside investment managers and hedge fund executives, raises the possibility of sensitive information being shared behind closed doors. If economic strategies or interest rate shifts are discussed informally, without regulatory oversight, it could give private financiers an unfair advantage in the markets, a charge that, if proven, would constitute not just ethical lapses, but possible criminal behavior. However, due to the strict confidentiality imposed on attendees, verifying whether market-sensitive discussions take place is virtually impossible. The media's role is also crucial in evaluating the credibility of the evidence. Numerous major publications have historically ignored Bilderberg altogether, despite their own editors being on the guest list. This near-universal silence among outlets like the New York Times, the Washington Post, and The Economist, all of which are usually eager to report on high-level gatherings, has struck many observers as suspicious. Whether this silence is the result of complicity, professional courtesy, or merely editorial discretion remains a subject of debate. Yet it is difficult to overlook the optics. The very institutions tasked with holding power to account seem unwilling to scrutinize an event attended by their own leadership. In the end, the lack of hard evidence both weakens and strengthens the theory. From a conventional investigative standpoint, the absence of documentation makes it difficult to draw definitive conclusions. But from a conspiratorial lens, that very absence is seen not as a void, but as the product of deliberate concealment. For believers, the secrecy is the smoking gun. For skeptics, it's a frustrating dead end. What remains is a narrative built on patterns, correlations, and circumstantial anomalies, a web of inference that, while not conclusive, refuses to be dismissed outright. While proponents of the Bilderberg conspiracy theory point to shadowy connections and suspicious patterns, skeptics and researchers from mainstream academic and journalistic circles offer a more grounded explanation, one rooted in political tradition, institutional networking, and elite diplomacy, rather than covert control. They argue that the Bilderberg Group is less a secret government and more a modern version of an age-old practice. Powerful individuals meeting to share ideas and forge alliances outside the constraints of formal bureaucracy or media performance. To understand this view, it's necessary to grasp the concept of Track 2 diplomacy. This term refers to informal and unofficial meetings between influential figures, often outside the bounds of government protocol, intended to facilitate candid dialogue and build mutual understanding. Scholars in international relations suggest that Bilderberg functions similarly, offering a rare space where policymakers, financiers, and academics can speak without posturing for the press or placating voters. In this interpretation, the confidentiality isn't a tool of deception, but a necessity for honest conversation in a hyper-politicized world. Defenders of the group highlight that there are no binding resolutions passed at Bilderberg. No votes, no declarations. Attendees arrive with varying opinions and leave without being bound to any consensus. According to this view, the meetings are forums for discussion, not decisions. Even if powerful people are present, the gathering is likened more to a conference than a conspiracy. Some liken it to the World Economic Forum in Davos, only without the media spectacle. Journalists and academics who've gained access or spoken to attendees often report similar impressions. They describe panel discussions, moderated sessions, and off-the-record dialogues focused on current global challenges, from climate change to AI to global trade imbalances. While these topics are undeniably important, critics argue that their discussion behind closed doors still leaves the public in the dark. But skeptics of the conspiracy argue that privacy is not the same as plotting, and secrecy does not automatically imply nefarious intent. The grooming narrative, where Bilderberg allegedly identifies and elevates future leaders, is also disputed. Detractors point out that ambitious, capable people tend to attract invitations to exclusive events. Just because someone attends a Bilderberg meeting and later gains power does not prove causation. In a globalized world, elite circles are often small and interconnected. It is perhaps inevitable that tomorrow's leaders will be introduced to today's influencers in such venues. Additionally, the idea that a single group could steer global events across dozens of governments, cultures, and economies strikes many as implausible. Critics of the theory argue that the world is too complex, chaotic, and politically fragmented to be coordinated by a few annual meetings, no matter how elite the guest list. The pace of change and resistance from competing national interests, civil society, and digital transparency make top-down control increasingly difficult. Even within the group itself, there's internal diversity. Attendees reportedly range from far-left economists to conservative defense ministers, from environmental activists to oil executives. If Bilderberg truly were a monolithic cabal, it would likely not allow for such ideological variation. That diversity, say skeptics, undermines the idea of a singular, unified agenda being plotted in secret. Moreover, the accusation that media silence proves complicity is met with a more mundane explanation: editorial judgment. Newsrooms often prioritize stories with conflict, visuals, and audience relevance. A closed-door meeting without cameras, speeches, or accessible documents is, by those standards, hard to report. Some media insiders suggest that Bilderberg's low visibility results less from conspiracy and more from logistical disinterest. In the final analysis, the skeptical viewpoint does not deny that the Bilderberg Group is exclusive, powerful, and secretive. It acknowledges those facts, but interprets them as expressions of elite networking rather than sinister orchestration. In this framing, the group reflects the nature of global leadership, not a shadow government, but an informal club of influence where ideas circulate, alliances form, and consensus emerges over time, shaped more by inertia and shared interests than any coordinated conspiracy. Whether this is a benign feature of globalization or a troubling symptom of elite detachment depends entirely on where one draws the line between dialogue and control. The existence and continued operation of the Bilderberg Group raise profound questions about how power is structured and exercised in the modern world. Even if one rejects the idea of a secret global government, the group's mere existence symbolizes a deeper issue: the widening chasm between the global elite and the general public. In this light, the Bilderberg controversy is not just about conspiracy, it is about perception, access, and the psychological tension between democracy and elitism. At its core, Bilderberg embodies the idea that power increasingly resides not within formal institutions, but within networks, fluid, transnational, and largely invisible to the average person. The guests who attend these meetings are rarely bound by national allegiance in any meaningful way. They are citizens not of countries, but of systems. Finance, tech, military, diplomacy, media. Their decisions reverberate across borders, often with consequences for people they'll never meet. This abstraction of power fuels the perception that global governance is being carried out above the heads of ordinary citizens, in languages and rooms to which they have no access. This perception has real-world implications. The more opaque elite gatherings become, the more alienated the public feels. This alienation feeds into broader movements of political populism, distrust of institutions, and the rise of narratives that blame a shadowy they for the world's problems. In this environment, the Bilderberg Group becomes a symbol, a totem of everything people feel they cannot control. For some, it represents the hidden hand behind rising inequality, eroding national sovereignty, and policies that seem disconnected from public needs. Culturally, the secrecy of Bilderberg also collides with the era of radical transparency. In a world where live streams, leaks, and digital whistleblowers dominate headlines, a meeting with no cameras, no notes, and no public agenda feels not just outdated, but sinister. This contradiction fuels the theory's staying power. Whether or not anything conspiratorial actually happens at Bilderberg, its refusal to adapt to modern norms of openness makes it feel like it's hiding something, an impression that no amount of official statements can erase. Psychologically, humans are hardwired to seek patterns and assign intent to complex systems. When faced with institutions that seem too vast to understand and too distant to influence, conspiracy offers an explanation, comforting in its clarity, even if it's troubling in its implications. Bilderberg fits this psychological profile perfectly. It's exclusive, hard to access, and involves figures of immense influence. It doesn't need to do anything overtly secretive to feel threatening. Its very structure invites suspicion. The implications go even deeper. If a group like Bilderberg truly does shape global policy in subtle, informal ways, it challenges the very notion of democracy. Elections and public debates begin to feel like theatre, while the real decisions occur behind closed doors. Even if no literal conspiracies are taking place, the structural inequality of access to power is itself a kind of conspiracy, one where influence is determined not by the will of the people, but by connections, money, and pedigree. And yet, abolishing or exposing Bilderberg wouldn't necessarily solve the underlying problem. The same people would still hold influence, only their interactions would shift to other private settings, even harder to trace. The deeper issue is not the meeting itself, but the global architecture of power that enables it. An interlocking web of interests, ideologies, and institutions that operate largely outside of public oversight. Bilderberg, in this view, is not the cause of the problem. It is a symptom. It reflects a world where decision-making has drifted away from civic participation and toward elite consensus. Whether one sees this as necessary realism or dangerous elitism depends on their faith in institutions and their place within them. For many, it isn't about what Bilderberg does. It's about the unshakable feeling that they were never invited to the table in the first place. As the Bilderberg Group's name gradually entered the public consciousness, its influence began to seep into the broader fabric of societal discourse, not through official channels or direct policy-making, but through its symbolic power. It became shorthand for the idea that major events were not organic or accidental, but coordinated and engineered by unseen forces. This transformation in perception was amplified by media narratives, pop culture references, and the Internet's rapidly expanding network of alternative information sources. Whether or not the group actively shaped global decisions, it undeniably shaped the way people think about who holds power and how it is used. The media's treatment of Bilderberg has played a pivotal role in this transformation. For decades, mainstream outlets ignored the meetings altogether, even as major figures from their own editorial boards attended. This silence, whether motivated by discretion, complicity, or editorial irrelevance, fueled the belief that something important was being concealed. When coverage did appear, it often took the form of dismissive commentary or ridicule aimed at conspiracy theorists rather than serious investigation. This pattern created a feedback loop. The more the media ignored or belittled the topic, the more convinced skeptics became that a cover-up was underway. This narrative was further fueled by the rise of independent media and citizen journalism. As digital platforms democratized information sharing, previously fringe topics found massive new audiences. Bloggers, YouTubers, and podcast hosts began tracking Bilderberg meetings with the dedication of investigative reporters, staking out hotels, photographing arrivals, analyzing flight logs, and publishing leaked guest lists. Their reports may have lacked institutional backing, but they made up for it with immediacy and accessibility. For many, this was the first time they'd even heard of Bilderberg, and what they saw only confirmed their worst suspicions. The conspiracy also found a natural home in pop culture. Novels, films, and television shows frequently featured shadowy cabals of elites manipulating world events from behind the scenes. While these portrayals were often fictional, they resonated with the public imagination, particularly in an era of economic instability, political disillusionment, and growing inequality. The line between entertainment and belief began to blur, and Bilderberg, rarely mentioned by name but always evoked in spirit, became a fixture in the collective subconscious. Meanwhile, actual political movements began to reflect this growing sense of distrust. Across the globe, populist uprisings from both the left and the right targeted perceived globalist elites. From Brexit to Occupy Wall Street, from nationalist rhetoric in the United States to anti-EU sentiment across Europe, a common thread emerged: the belief that unelected elites were making decisions that affected the lives of ordinary people without their input or consent. The Bilderberg Group, though rarely at the center of these debates, often served as the perfect symbolic villain, an emblem of distant, detached power. In recent years, the group has tried to adapt to its more public profile. Official websites now publish attendee lists and general agenda topics, though no transcripts or detailed minutes are ever released. This partial transparency has done little to quell suspicion. For many critics, these gestures are seen as cosmetic, designed to placate a more vigilant public while preserving the core of the group's secrecy. The underlying question remains unanswered. Why do some of the most powerful people in the world still feel the need to meet behind closed doors without scrutiny in a world that increasingly demands openness? As social trust continues to erode and institutional legitimacy comes under pressure, the Bilderberg narrative is unlikely to fade. If anything, it is poised to grow even more influential as a symbol. In a world saturated with information yet starved for clarity, the image of a secretive global meeting of elites provides a powerful focal point for both skepticism and outrage. Whether fair or not, Bilderberg has become more than a conference. It is an idea, a metaphor, a mirror reflecting society's deepest anxieties about who truly holds the reins of power. Beyond the widely circulated theories of political engineering and economic orchestration lies a deeper layer of speculation, one that pushes the boundaries of conventional understanding and ventures into the realm of the fringe. These ideas, while often dismissed by mainstream observers, reflect a profound mistrust in established narratives and institutions. They don't just question the policies and influence of the Bilderberg Group. They question the very nature of power, secrecy, and even reality itself. Among the more extreme interpretations is the belief that the Bilderberg Group operates not as a policy-making forum, but as a kind of high council for a globalist agenda aimed at erasing national borders, suppressing individual freedoms, and creating a unified world government. According to this perspective, the annual meetings are not casual discussions, but but ritualistic gatherings where decisions are made in secret and then executed through transnational bodies like the United Nations, the World Bank, or the International Monetary Fund. Proponents of this theory often point to long-standing Bilderberg themes, like global governance, trade liberalization, and technology regulation, as coded language for a systematic dismantling of national sovereignty. An even more speculative offshoot suggests that the group's true power lies not in politics or finance, but in control over knowledge, particularly advanced technology and metaphysical sciences hidden from public view. Echoing tropes more commonly found in science fiction, some theorists claim that certain Bilderberg participants, especially those from the defense or aerospace sectors, are privy to technologies that remain classified or deliberately suppressed. These could include zero-point energy systems, anti-gravity propulsion, or even contact with non-human intelligences. In this view, the group acts not merely as an elite steering committee, but as the gatekeepers of a hidden future, a timeline of scientific and social evolution reserved for the chosen few. These ideas may sound implausible, but they resonate deeply with those who believe the public is being kept in the dark, not just about economic policies, but about the very shape of reality. The secrecy of the group provides fertile ground for such theories. With no public transcripts or recordings, the imagination fills the vacuum. If the world's most powerful people are meeting in private, why assume they're only discussing interest rates and immigration? For some, the lack of evidence is not a dead end, it's an invitation to theorize without limits. There are also theories that link Bilderberg to esoteric traditions and occult practices. These narratives borrow from older conspiracy tropes involving secret societies like the Illuminati or Freemasons, suggesting that Bilderberg is a modern manifestation of ancient power cults. According to this line of thinking, the meetings are more than strategic gatherings. They are rituals, symbolic acts meant to reinforce elite unity and invoke control over the masses through psychological or even spiritual means. The presence of royal figures, high-ranking clergy, and generational wealth magnates only adds to the mystique, conjuring images of a priesthood of power operating just beyond the reach of ordinary citizens. Even more fringe interpretations take a cosmological view, proposing that the Bilderberg Group is influenced, knowingly or unknowingly, by non-human entities. In these versions of the theory, attendees are either in communication with extraterrestrials, guided by ancient interdimensional intelligences, or manipulated by artificial superintelligences beyond human comprehension. These ideas are often dismissed outright, yet they persist in online forums, books, and alternative media spaces where the unexplained is not rejected but embraced. What these fringe theories ultimately reveal is not necessarily the truth about Bilderberg, but the deep psychological need to explain power that feels untouchable. When traditional institutions fail to earn trust, when elites seem unaccountable and insulated, the mind reaches beyond what is known into the speculative. Whether these ideas are grounded in fact or fantasy, they serve a function: to impose meaning on the opaque, to provide narrative where there is only silence, and to articulate fears too vast to be expressed in conventional terms. In the world of conspiracy theories, Bilderberg is more than a meeting. It is a mythos. And myths, even if untrue, carry tremendous power. They do not require proof to thrive. They endure because they reflect something deeper than fact, a sense that the visible world is a mask and behind it lies something vast, hidden, and possibly beyond comprehension. The story of the Bilderberg Group is not easily confined to the realm of fact or fiction. It occupies a liminal space, half-confirmed reality, half-constructed myth, where power, secrecy, and perception blur into something more enduring than headlines or agendas. After nearly 70 years of quiet influence and persistent suspicion, the group remains a paradox. It is both mundane and mysterious, defended as a think tank and condemned as a shadow government. Whether viewed through the lens of cautious diplomacy or deep conspiracy, its impact on the cultural and political psyche is undeniable. What makes the Bilderberg Group so compelling and so enduring in the public imagination is not what it proves, but what it suggests. Its secretive nature and elite roster offer a canvas onto which people project their fears, frustrations, and anxieties about the modern world. For some, it represents the rational core of global cooperation, an informal yet vital space where complex issues are tackled away from the noise of politics. For others, it is the very symbol of democracy's erosion, a gathering where decisions are made far from the reach of citizens and far beyond the control of elections. This duality ensures that the Bilderberg narrative is self-sustaining. The more the group denies influence, the more skeptics believe it wields it. The more the press avoids coverage, the more compelling the conspiracy becomes. Silence, in this context, is not neutrality, it is interpreted as complicity. And transparency, when offered in small doses, only raises further suspicion. Why release attendee lists but no transcripts? Why name the topics but never the conclusions? In an age defined by information overload and surveillance, opacity is no longer a neutral choice. It is a political act. As the world moves deeper into the 21st century, shaped by artificial intelligence, climate change, geopolitical shifts and economic volatility, the question of who holds power and how transparently they wield it becomes more urgent. The rise of populist movements, the decline of trust in institutions, and the erosion of objective truth all reflect a crisis not just in politics, but in perception. In this environment, the Bilderberg Group serves as both scapegoat and cipher. It becomes the thing we fear, that the world is run by a few, for the benefit of the few, and that the rest of us are little more than spectators. Yet this fear also reflects a deeper truth. The concentration of influence, whether in Washington, Brussels, Beijing, or a luxury hotel in Switzerland, is real. Power today is rarely loud. It is subtle, systemic, and diffuse. It flows not just through governments, but through markets, algorithms, and soft influence. And in this new terrain, groups like Bilderberg, however unofficial, take on new significance. They may not issue laws or command armies, but they help shape the weather of global consensus, nudging ideas into policies, elevating voices, and quietly sidelining others. Whether Bilderberg is a conspiracy, a curiosity, or a necessary evil depends largely on one's worldview. But one fact is undeniable. It exists. It meets. And those who attend it are among the most powerful people on the planet. In an era where transparency is demanded and trust is in short supply, that alone is enough to keep the questions alive. Thanks for listening. This has been another episode of Conspiracy Theories and Cover-Ups. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you'd like to support the show, subscribe to Conspiracy Theories Podcast on Spotify. Subscribe now.